Tell me something. You can go anywhere.
Different worlds drawn to each other like...
In 2022, headlines around the world screamed one name, Ezra Miller. The star, once hailed as the future of Hollywood, the face of DC's The Flash, had spiraled into chaos. Arrested multiple times for assault, accused of grooming minors, breaking into homes, and behaving erratically across several countries, Miller became one of the most controversial figures in modern cinema. Warner Brothers, facing public outrage, was forced to decide whether to cancel a $200 million superhero film just months before release. How did one of Hollywood's brightest young talents turn into its most unpredictable nightmare? Was it fame, pressure, or something darker behind those haunting eyes? This is the rise, fall, and uncertain redemption of Ezra Miller, the actor who ran faster than fame itself, only to crash harder than anyone imagined. Ezra Matthew Miller was born on September 30, 1992, in Wyckoff, New Jersey, a quiet, suburban town far removed from the chaos that would one day define their life. Their father, Robert S. Miller, was a senior vice president at Hyperion Books, while their mother, Marta Koch, was a modern dancer. The mix of business discipline and artistic passion shaped Ezra's early world in complex ways. From a young age, Ezra showed signs of being different, gifted, curious, but also deeply sensitive. They struggled with a speech impediment and used singing to overcome it. Performing opera at just 6 years old, music became their first form of self-expression, a safe place in a world that often felt too loud. At home, Ezra grew up surrounded by books and art, but also under pressure. Their father's corporate precision clashed with their mother's emotional artistry, creating a tension that mirrored Ezra's own inner conflict, a constant battle between control and chaos. When they were a teenager, that battle grew stronger. Ezra began questioning identity, sexuality, and the expectations of a world that demanded labels. They identified as queer, and later as non-binary, a choice that brought both empowerment and isolation. Those early years weren't marked by poverty or tragedy, but by something perhaps even more complex, a search for belonging. The same intensity that would later light up the screen was already visible in the child who couldn't stand still, who saw the world not in black and white, but in constant motion. Behind the charm and intelligence, however, there was also a shadow. Friends later recalled a young Ezra who was brilliant but volatile, always ready to challenge authority, and often misunderstood. That mix of genius and rebellion would follow them into adulthood, for better and for worse. Ezra Miller attended Rockland Country Day School and later the Hudson School, progressive institutions that encouraged individuality and artistic exploration. But while teachers praised their creativity, Ezra often felt detached from traditional education. They were restless, uncontainable, always looking for the next form of expression. Acting quickly became that outlet. At the age of 16, Ezra dropped out of high school after landing their first significant role in the independent film After School, 2008. The movie, directed by Antonio Campos, was dark, introspective, and unsettling, much like Ezra themselves. Playing a teenager who witnesses two classmates' accidental deaths, Miller delivered a haunting performance that caught the attention of critics. It was raw, unfiltered, and disturbingly authentic. This debut set the tone for what would become Ezra's signature, emotional intensity and psychological depth. Unlike the polished teen idols of the late 2000s, Ezra represented something different, the outsider, the thinker, the rebel. Hollywood took notice. In the years that followed, Miller appeared in several indie projects, slowly building a reputation as a fearless performer. Their breakout came in We Need to Talk About Kevin, 2011. Opposite Tilda Swinton, as Kevin, a sociopathic teenager, Ezra's portrayal was chillingly believable, earning international acclaim and positioning them as one of the most promising young actors of their generation. But fame came quickly, perhaps too quickly. At just 19, Ezra was being invited to red carpets, fashion shows, and after parties where excess was the norm. They were no longer the outsider looking in. They had become part of the world they once questioned. Still, at this stage, the balance hadn't yet broken. The promise of stardom shimmered bright, and Warner Brothers soon came calling, offering Ezra the role that would define their career. And ultimately, their downfall. The turning point of Ezra Miller's career came in 2012 with The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Playing Patrick, a witty, openly gay teen struggling to find acceptance, Ezra captured hearts around the world. The role felt deeply personal. It wasn't just acting. It was confession. The film became a cult hit, and Ezra, with their sharp humor and emotional honesty, became a new kind of Hollywood star, one who challenged gender norms and radiated authenticity. By their early 20s, Ezra had become the face of a generation that wanted to break labels. They weren't just a movie star, they were a cultural statement. In interviews, Ezra spoke about identity, art, and the chaos of human nature with an intensity that made them magnetic. Rolling Stone described them as Hollywood's unpredictable genius. In 2015, the spotlight grew even brighter when Warner Brothers cast Ezra as Barry Allen, aka The Flash, in the DC Extended Universe. The announcement shocked many, a bold, unconventional choice for a superhero. But that was exactly the point. Ezra's eccentric energy was what made the character fresh. Their cameo in Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, 2016, and the Justice League, 2017, established them as a cornerstone of DC's cinematic ambitions. At the same time, Ezra starred as Credence Barebone in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, solidifying a rare position, one actor simultaneously leading two of Hollywood's biggest franchises. From indie cinema to blockbuster fame, Miller had achieved what few could. They were gracing magazine covers, walking high-fashion runways for Prada and Saint Laurent, and being hailed as a gender-fluid icon. Their interviews were strange but fascinating, their charisma undeniable. But behind the glittering rise, there were already cracks forming. On set, some described Ezra as brilliant but erratic, spontaneous, impulsive, and increasingly unpredictable. Fame, which had once liberated them, was beginning to consume them. The same energy that made Ezra magnetic on screen now began spilling uncontrollably into real life. Still, to the world, Ezra Miller was unstoppable, the young, fearless face of a new Hollywood. No one could have predicted how quickly that image would implode, because just a few years later, the same headlines that once praised their brilliance would turn into warnings. The Flash arrested. Ezra Miller spirals out of control. And it all began with a single violent night in Hawaii. Ezra Miller's love life was as complex and unconventional as their personality. From the beginning, they rejected traditional labels, describing themselves as queer and later as non-binary. Using they, them pronouns. "I'm attracted to people who bring me alive," Ezra once said in an interview. Regardless of gender, their relationships were often with artists, musicians, and free spirits, people drawn to Ezra's magnetic mix of vulnerability and chaos. In 2010, they briefly dated Zoe Kravitz, their Beware the Gonzo co-star. And though the romance ended quickly, the two remained close. Over the next few years, Ezra was linked to several partners across the art and music scene, rarely confirming anything publicly. In 2018, during the height of their fame, Ezra made headlines for claiming to be in a polyamorous collective, a group of people living and loving without hierarchy or ownership. They spoke of rejecting the patriarchy's rules about love, saying that monogamy wasn't compatible with their spirit. To some, it was inspiring, to others, confusing. But as Ezra's career accelerated, their personal relationships became increasingly chaotic. Friends described them as passionate but volatile, capable of immense tenderness one moment and sudden detachment the next. They can make you feel like you're the only person in the universe, one ex-partner said, and then disappear without warning. There were whispers of emotional manipulation, blurred boundaries, and control. These rumors intensified after a series of disturbing reports emerged. claims that Ezra had befriended and possibly influenced underage fans. And later, accusations of cult-like behavior. In 2020, the controversy deepened when a video surfaced online showing Ezra allegedly choking a woman outside a bar in Iceland. Though no charges were filed, the footage shocked fans worldwide. It marked the first clear sign that Ezra's eccentricity might have crossed into something darker. The line between art, freedom, and destruction was beginning to blur. What had once seemed like harmless rebellion now appeared dangerous, and those who once saw Ezra as an icon of liberation began to question. Was this still the same free spirit who had inspired millions, or someone losing control of themselves entirely? The storm began in 2022, and it was relentless. Ezra Miller, once Hollywood's enigmatic darling, had become its most unpredictable headline. In March, while in Hawaii, Miller was arrested for disorderly conduct and harassment after an incident at a karaoke bar. Witnesses said Ezra shouted obscenities, snatched a microphone from a woman mid-song, and lunged at a man playing darts. Police described them as agitated and uncooperative. Just weeks later, another arrest followed, this time for allegedly throwing a chair at a woman, leaving her injured. The news exploded across every entertainment outlet. The Flash actor arrested again. But that was only the beginning. Reports emerged that Ezra had been housing a mother and her 3 children on their Vermont property, allegedly in unsafe conditions with firearms scattered around. Then came even darker allegations, families accusing Miller of grooming and manipulating minors. One of the most widely discussed cases involved activist Takata Iron Eyes, whose parents accused Ezra of using cult-like influence over their daughter since she was 12. They claimed Ezra had provided alcohol, drugs, and control over Takata's movements, allegations that Ezra publicly denied, calling them baseless. Still, the story went viral, painting an image of a star spinning completely out of control. Every few weeks, a new headline appeared: Miller breaking into a home to steal alcohol. Miller allegedly leading a group described by tabloids as a spiritual commune. Videos of erratic behavior circulated online, with fans wondering whether this was performance art or a genuine mental breakdown. For Warner Brothers, the timing was catastrophic. The Flash, a $200 million tentpole film meant to reboot the DC universe, was months from release. Executives reportedly debated scrapping the entire project, but the cost was too high. Instead, they attempted damage control. Ezra issued a statement in August 2022, apologizing and admitting to suffering from complex mental health issues. They promised to seek treatment and return to a more stable path. But public opinion was divided. To some, it was too little, too late. To others, it was a long overdue moment of accountability. What couldn't be denied was that Ezra Miller had become a symbol, not of rebellion or creativity anymore, but of how fast fame can devour its own. Industry insiders whispered about their erratic presence on set, their distrust of authority, and their tendency to vanish without notice. For years, eccentricity had been part of Ezra's brand, the genius outsider who didn't play by the rules. But now, that same persona had turned self-destructive. When The Flash finally premiered in 2023, its shadow loomed large. Critics called the movie cursed, audiences were hesitant, and box office numbers underwhelmed. What should have been Ezra's crowning achievement instead became a symbol of chaos, a blockbuster haunted by its own star. Hollywood had seen scandals before, but few as raw, erratic, and public as Ezra Miller's. It wasn't just a fall from grace, it was a free fall into the unknown. And as the headlines faded, one question remained: could Ezra Miller ever come back from this? In the aftermath of the 2022 chaos, Ezra Miller disappeared from the spotlight. Paparazzi shots vanished, interviews stopped, and for months, the world heard nothing but speculation. Some thought Warner Brothers had permanently cut ties. Others whispered that Ezra was in treatment, quietly trying to rebuild what was left of their life. In August 2022, a rare statement appeared. Ezra apologized publicly. admitting to complex mental health issues and promising to seek ongoing treatment. Having recently gone through a time of intense crisis, the message read, "I now understand that I am suffering from complex mental health issues and have begun treatment." It was a humble, almost fragile moment, the first time the star's voice sounded human again. Behind the scenes, Warner Brothers executives decided to move forward with the Flash movie. Banking on Ezra's cooperation, they reportedly stayed in close contact, setting strict behavioral conditions for promotional appearances. While Ezra did not engage in major press events, they appeared briefly at the film's Los Angeles premiere in June 2023, composed, quiet, and noticeably changed. But public trust is difficult to rebuild. The Flash underperformed at the box office, earning roughly half of what the studio expected. Audiences couldn't separate the art from the scandal. No amount of visual effects could erase the memory of arrests, chaos, and controversy. Still, Hollywood's history is full of comebacks, and some insiders believe Ezra's story isn't over. Those who have worked with them speak of unmatched talent and emotional intensity. Director Andy Muschietti once said, "Ezra is one of the best actors I've ever worked with. Whatever struggles they're facing, I hope the world remembers that." After retreating to Vermont, Ezra reportedly focused on therapy, reconnecting with family, and working on small creative projects away from the public eye. Sources close to them say they've been sober, grounded, and calm, a stark contrast to the volatile figure once splashed across tabloid covers. Whether this quiet phase is a genuine rebirth or just another pause before the next storm remains uncertain. But for the first time in years, Ezra Miller seems to have stopped running, not as the Flash, but as themselves. Today, Ezra Miller lives quietly in Vermont, far from red carpets, flashing cameras, and the chaos that once defined their life. They've been seen tending to a small farm, spending time with close friends, and focusing on recovery. No major film announcements, no media tours, just silence. For someone once addicted to attention, the quiet seems deliberate. Warner Brothers remains cautious but has not entirely severed ties. Rumors swirl that Ezra could return as the Flash in future DC projects, especially after James Gunn hinted that no one's story is over yet. But nothing is confirmed, and for now, the studio seems to be watching from a distance, waiting to see if this calm will last. Among fans, opinions remain divided. Some believe in redemption, arguing that Hollywood has forgiven worse. Others insist that accountability must come before forgiveness. Talent can't excuse trauma, one critic wrote, yet, beneath the noise, there's an undeniable fascination, the same reason people watched Ezra rise, fall, and maybe rise again. In interviews from years past, Ezra often spoke about transformation, the idea that destruction and creation are two sides of the same truth. Perhaps that's what this silence represents, not exile, but evolution. Maybe the chaos has burned itself out, maybe it hasn't, but one thing is certain, Ezra Miller's story isn't finished. Whether they return as a star, a cautionary tale, or something entirely new, the world will be watching.